Welcome to the broadcast. You're watching KUTV Money Monday, and it's time for a discussion of the night. Tonight's insightful discussion is on the pressing economic matters that is facing Kenya at this particular point in time. And to help us talk about this discussion is John Mungai, who is the National Secretary, Economist Society of Kenya, and Professor David Minja, who is a strategist, governance, and public policy expert. Karibuni sana to KUTV. Glad to have you. Maybe you can tell us what you do on the side in terms of economy-wise, advising. What do you think about the current economic situation in Kenya?
Well, thank you, and good evening, everyone. I think from where I see it, the economy is struggling. But although the government is putting effort to see that it stabilizes, there's still many issues that are outstanding. Issues of debt, issues of inflation, high interest rates, high unemployment. And in a nutshell, the cost of living for mwananchi is quite high. And everyone is crying. At least the common mwananchi, the citizen, is crying that things are not good.
All right. Yeah. I still want to stick with you now that you've mentioned the government is also struggling in terms of public debt. How do you assess the current status of Kenya's public debt and its implication, and maybe for government spending expenditures?
Well, we are not yet in a debt crisis, but if we do not manage debt properly, we might be heading there. At this point, we can still say we can sustain that level, although it's still high, because we are talking of about 70% of GDP, our debt being 70% of GDP, which is, of course, way beyond even what IMF has recommended, which is 50%. So, but if we are able to consolidate what we have now, if we go the way of fiscal consolidation, we manage our fiscal deficits and accumulation of debts, we could stabilize, I could say that, with time. But where we are not yet out of the woods. We are still in the woods, and we have to do something more than what we are doing now. Yes.
John, what is your view on the current status of economy? How would you rate it now that you are someone in the economic space?
Thank you. Before I answer that, I want to briefly talk about ESK, Economic Society of Kenya. We are an association of economists in the country, and I'm the National Secretary, and we invite everyone, including Prof and his colleagues in academia, to come and join us so that we can have a voice, especially now that we have some serious challenges that needs not lawyers, not accountants, but economists to guide and advise the government. Picking on where Prof left, I think I would say we are in the woods, actually, compounded by, among other things from what Prof said, is one, the other crisis, the Russia-Ukraine crisis, affects many things, supplies, world logistics routes. Number two, what we have is the inflation and the Kenya shilling depreciation. It is adding more trouble or more challenge to the debt issue in Kenya. I mean, by December, if I remember it right, we almost added 890 billion to our debts without borrowing, just because of the Kenya shilling depreciation. Compounded by the draw that was there, now it is easing a bit. So, I would add what Prof said, we are at the cliff. So if we misjudge our balance, we might fall off, but if we balance well, we might walk off the cliff. Yes.
So what strategies should the government consider to manage well this public debt and also ensure adequate investment in key sectors?
I'll look at first would be the food issue, the agriculture sector. For the first time, I think late last year, the food imports surpassed machinery, if I'm not wrong. Why should we be importing food? We are an agri-based economy. And if we can be able to promote our agri-sector the way we are promoting the affordable housing, I think we'll be solving one of the major crises touching on inflation, the flight of forex, the dollars, and so on and so forth. Number two, I think it is austerity measures. The expenditure that we see, with the government, if we can be able to exert a little bit of pressure in terms of expenditure, would be one of the key strategies that can sort these, these cliff balancing issue. Otherwise, we don't want to fall off the cliff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you've also mentioned about this depreciation of the Kenyan shilling. As of last week, we were at 162, that is against the dollar. So what factors contribute to this depreciation of the dollar? Prof, let's start with you.
Yeah, you see, our economic situation, or where we are now, we are not able to generate or produce enough so that we are able to sustain our operations and the market, in the sense that, for example, our foreign exchange earnings are weak, and what we get out of our imports is lower than what we get. What we incur as a result of our imports is actually higher than what we get when we export our goods and services. So there is an imbalance. And that imbalance makes us demand more dollars, for example, than the dollars that we get. Then on the side of the debt, remember our debts are dollar denominated. So when we are paying our loans, we are paying them in form of dollars. Yet we are producing in form of shillings at the local market. So what we produce locally, we convert that, or our revenue locally that helps to pay the loans is in form of shillings. Then we convert that into dollars in order to pay the loans. So you find that we are at a weaker position. And of course, so it's a question of the market, that we are performing, we are in a weaker position in terms of performance in the market. And that's why you find that the shilling is continuously performing poorer and poorer. So there are compounding factors that cause currency to be weaker against another currency. So these are just a few of them. So when we import, like I said earlier, when we import more than we export, then you expect us to have a deficit. And that erodes our balance of payment, our reserves. So, and once our reserves have been depleted, then of course you expect that we are going to suffer as a local currency. And then of course the question of our loans. What the government did, for example, last week to have a yen-denominated loan, you see, that's a positive thing. So that if we can try to move away from just depending on the dollar, because it's so expensive, then that would start the process of curing. But of course, it was a drop in the ocean compared to what we have already incurred in terms of debts. Something that I would want to point out before I move out of that depreciation of the shilling is the fact that over the last 10 years, when we look at our debt as opposed to our GDP, our debt per capita has always been higher than our GDP per capita, implying that even the loans that we get do not significantly affect our economic growth. So it doesn't really make us significantly better because we have borrowed. Of course, we have seen that the economy has been growing after COVID. Moved from 4.4, we went to 5.3. Now there are projections that still we are going to be above 5%. But of course, that is a drop in the ocean, considering that the debt, the cost of debt is still high, and we are required to generate a lot of revenue in order to service our debts. So like we are saying, we are still having problems, and our shilling will still continue being beaten in the market as a result of these demands, because there's a lot of demand in terms of this dollar, we require lots of dollars to service our loans, to import goods and services that we do not have, especially those of capital nature. And that requires us to have more and more dollars, which we do not have. So the demand is higher than the supply, if you would say that.
John, I'll also bring that question to you. What are the potential economic ramifications now that this dollar continues to, the Kenyan shilling continues to depreciate against the dollar?
Yeah, so number one of the most serious economic impact is our debt. Yeah, and remember, when you have borrowed as a country, the first collection that you make, you must commit to pay. So we'll see more of either more taxation or more borrowing so that we can service the debts. Yeah, that's a very serious issue because we continue, impacting our economic growth. I want to pick on where Prof left. There is a study that was done by Cato Institute, and they analyzed from 2010, I think, to 2020, studies on public debts and economic growth. And they said anything above 51.5% debt to GDP ratio affects growth of the economy negatively by 0.16. So we are at, I think, 68.
Yeah, actually, it's slightly over 70. 70 point something, heading to 71%.
Yes, meaning it is still impacting our growth. Maybe we could be doing 8% or 10% per annum. That said, number two is it has a positive aspect if we were an exporting country, but we are not. We are much of importing rather than exporting country. For example, if our coffee, our horticulture, that is flowers, and so on and so forth, and tea were doing well and we're exporting, then we could be happy because the farmers will be earning more. Yeah, but if you look at countries like Japan who export to us machinery, or India, they enjoy when the local currency is devalued against the dollar. But for us, we suffer because most of our things, including food, including rice, these laptops we import, are the change that we see. So what happens is that when the shilling depreciates, it means the value of, for example, whatever you earn here, if you're earning, if you could afford 10 laptops, it goes from 100 to 150, then you could afford 5, for example. It means, yes, you are getting X amount of salary, but the value of that money goes down by that depreciation. So you can see the impact on the household, the common mwananchi, and so on and so forth. Remember, when you import even a biro or a sufuria or a spoon, it means you must factor in the aspect of the shilling depreciation. So it has a compounding effect on the economy. And therefore, it is upon the policymakers to make sure that we manage the situation. Otherwise, it's going to get compounding further, and things will get worse.
We can all agree that right now, Kenyans claim that they were being overly taxed at this point. And now, despite these high taxation rates, the government still says there is a lack of funds in the government. So what are the underlying reasons for this apparent paradox?
It is true that we are highly taxed. But if you look at the projections by Treasury and even what KRA is supposed to collect, it is far beyond. It's an astronomical figure. For them to bridge the deficit, we need to collect a lot of tax. However, that tax or the resources to generate that level of taxation may not be there because the focus now has been on the employee mostly, because in my view, those are low-hanging fruits. You can easily get an employee and tax them as much as, of course, you would perhaps want to tax them. But still, there are other sectors of the economy that are not yet as taxed as an employee. There are even sectors in the economy that are also not within the mainstream economy. And yet they are generating a lot of money, but you find them somehow they escape the noose from KRA. They are not captured, and they are not, because of the way our economy is structured and a substantial percentage of our economy is quite informal. Yet the fact that it's informal does not mean those people do not earn some revenue that can actually be taxed. So the people that can easily be caught, who are the employees, then you'll find that they'll have to be taxed quite heavily. And again, you don't want to go the way of, for example, introducing other taxes that will affect everybody, because the poor and the vulnerable will be affected negatively. So it's a way of trying to balance to get this as much revenue as possible, and at the same time not hurt the vulnerable.
Yeah.
But now the middle class mostly is the one that has been affected by these policies. You'll find that, again, those people at the end, they may not feel it. Yeah? Those at the top, in terms of finances, the rich guys, they may not feel it as much. If, in any case, they are paying that tax, we do not know. So in that case, you'll find that the government will continue wanting to tax more and more, because remember, we have accumulated debt. We have also the problem of a depreciating currency, meaning that we have to mobilize more than we were doing when the shilling was fairly stable. So we have to add more than like what was saying. So compounding all this, then you would not expect even the government to spend more on either development or assisting the economy to stabilize, because there is this other huge burden. You recall by June, we need to retire the Eurobond. And of course, the government has decided to go the way right now of partial buyback, which is a good thing, because you don't want to wait until the tail end and you're struggling to pay back the loan. But of course, they are doing that in the midst of a weak currency and also less than projected level of revenue. So compounding all this, the government will continue taxing those that they can tax in order to see whether they are going to raise the revenue required. Of course, the revenue will not be enough. That's why, like I said earlier, you saw the president also looking for other options, like now going for other currencies, currencies denominated loans, like yen. Yeah, because that is not as expensive as a dollar. Also the way of PPP, and we have seen the government going that way. That could also be a way that would still help the government come up with or continue with their projects, and at the same time, they are actually not paying the loan. The users will have to pay the loan. But there's a very pertinent question when it comes to sometimes PPP, because you produce a good or create an infrastructure, assuming that there will be demand for that service. Yeah. So when you even put up a project under PPP that will be paid, privately funded, and therefore users will pay directly, you are assuming that there will be enough demand to repay that loan or to meet that cost. Yeah.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Now, John, what policy measures still on this taxation? What policy measures can the government do to enhance tax revenue collection and also ensure that the government still effectively gets funding like it needs?
Yeah, but before I come to that, I want to add what Prof said. We're going to get more taxed. There's no way out, especially for the low-hanging, as he calls them. Number one, the government is trying to avoid borrowing as much as possible. Remember, we're almost hitting the ceiling. So number two, we have a growing debt. So you have to collect more to cover the growing debt. And number three, the government is, sorting the social issues, the recurrent bill, the salaries, and so on and so forth. So taxation is going to continue from a collection perspective, but whether the modalities in place are the best, I tend to agree with the Prof that we are focusing so much on a small segment that we can't squeeze. There is a way you can squeeze a salary until to a last point that there is no marginal benefit. Why should I continue working if, for example, all I work is going to pay tax. So I would pick on where Prof said on your question. Number one, there is a lot of untapped segment in terms of taxation called Juakali sector. And they're not Juakali per se. There's someone in Juakali, for example, earning 3 times what you earn, but they never pay tax. They never pay any pay, any NSSF or whatever. Then how do we incentivize them, to come to the whatever bracket that they can be taxed? What makes me as a Juakali person be willing to declare that this is what I earn? Do I get some benefits that I feel comfortable and feel good to come and say, I think now I should register and be that bracket? That's number one. Let us come up with policies or strategies that will encourage more people to be in the tax bracket. Number two, the government will, actually we have seen that, will continue looking at how they can avoid borrowing. Because as much as you want to do your project as a government, you must borrow. Borrowing means more taxation and so on and so forth. So more of public-private partnerships. Number three, I think we need to have policies that will encourage more investment. We have seen capital flight from here to neighboring countries. What is it that we are doing that is discouraging investors and making them live here? Aren't there any positive way we can do it to retain more, or even extract them from neighboring countries to come to this country? Because the more we create more employment, more production, we are creating more revenue for the government. So I think among other things, those would be the areas that the government need to look at. But most importantly, of emphasis is we must stop focusing on the salaried category of Kenyans, because there is an extent that we can squeeze the earnings, and they are given number. So there's no way we are going to increase our taxes by taxing more. And someone said, you cannot tax as a nation your way to prosperity. Yeah. So
you suggest that instead of the salaried ones, the government should go down to those in Juakali sector? Yeah, but find means of incentivizing them and making them formal, so that you can earn, the levies and the taxes from them. Otherwise, if I'm Juakali, why should I register if I cannot get any benefit by registering or being formal? So we should have a mechanism or incentives to make these guys come on either formalize their work and so on and so forth, and have them in the tax bracket. Otherwise, every day you wake up to a taxation, a new tax, a new levy, might not work in the long run. Yeah. Prof, you're a scholar. Now, I want us to talk about this e-citizen platform and its implementation.
Yes.
How do you perceive the potential impact of the e-citizen platform, now particularly in streamlining government services, in this case, education?
Well, it's a good idea, but even if it's a good idea, it does not mean that you will have to kind of force everybody to go into it. For example, the schools. Specifically, you have asked me about the schools.
Yes.
Looking at the past, the history, how the government has been funding schools, or even releasing the competition to schools, you'll find there have been delays or insufficient funding. So now you can imagine that your money is being paid directly to government, and this is what you use for example, if it's a boarding secondary school or primary school, this is what you use to pay for supplies, the food and for the students and all that. And you have to wait for the government that it delays competition to remit this money to you. The idea is good, but our systems are weak in terms of efficiency. They are not efficient enough to facilitate this person or this institution whose fees has been paid, but it is held up somewhere by government, and the process is inefficient in such a way that you'll have to wait for some months or actually months, not weeks, to receive this money. So what will the schools be doing in terms of facilitating the education of these pupils or students? Actually, there's a problem. For schools, there's a problem. for these other government institutions not necessarily dealing with the essential services, I still feel that they can go that way. But you can imagine, for example, now it's the school. Next time we don't know. You might hear the government saying the water companies, because they are parastatals, you also pay through e-citizen. And this is a service that requires daily funding, and the government will stay for months. So people start getting cholera and other sicknesses because the water cannot be treated, the money is with the government. So the government has to carefully consider those services that can effectively and efficiently be paid through e-citizen, and those that they have to continue being managed the way they are being managed now, until such a time that proper, efficient systems will be in place that now will enable everyone to come on board. But we do not want a situation where we force everyone to go into e-citizen, and then there is a gridlock. Services cannot be rendered. There are problems. Citizens cannot be served well. We do not want, again, the government to retract and say, well, we have decided that these others can be released. They can go back to the former. That means you had not planned properly, or you had not thought out the whole issue very well. Yes.
All right, now we are running out of time, but John, this should also serve as your parting shot. These challenges that are coming up with the implementation of this e-citizen, how can they be addressed?
First of all, I think I tend to differ a bit from what Prof said. I think from a government and collector's perspective, consolidation is good. It is good in that it enables you as the collector to track where the money is coming from. Also, we have seen a lot of misuse or mismanagement of funds collected by government agencies. The streamlining has been easier, be it at ID level, passport level. You can give the examples. On schools, I'm not an academician. Prof is, so he can speak better on that one. But I think consolidation and having a single paying point, from a collector's perspective, it is good for consolidating the money and for accountability. There are challenges here in schools, even in universities. They're supposed to pay even for food using e-citizen.
That's right. That was the debate to that.
How practical it is, I don't know. Yeah, but I think if then there are inefficiencies, maybe Prof and the team has identified, they can be brought to the table and be discussed. But as a practitioner who has been in the financial sector financial service sector, I can tell you for sure that when you consolidate and you have a single paying point, even the temptation of the person collecting is using the money, is removed. So, Prof, I beg to depart from your
All right.
perspective.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Time is
Yeah.
up for this discussion. But we can continue to have this discussion on the side. It's a discussion that never ends. Thank you so much for making time for us tonight.
Asante.
All right, that is John Mungai. John Mungai is the National Secretary, Economic Society of Kenya, and Professor David Minja, a strategist, governance, and public policy expert. We are taking a very second short break. At this point, we're coming back with so much more. Stay with us.